Hi, this is Street Life, and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review and discussion of Chef. Chef is a film about a guy, Carl Casper, who is the chef of a successful restaurant in Los Angeles. The film opens on a night when they're expecting a very popular restaurant critic. As you can imagine, everyone's quite nervous. Carl's initial plan is to put together a fresh, creative menu, something inspiring that's going to be new and different to impress this critic. But unfortunately, while he's the chef, it's not his restaurant. He's working for someone else. The owner of the restaurant comes in and wants him to play it safe. Carl plans a cutting-edge menu that would impress the critic, but the owner of the restaurant talks him into going with his old classics, dependable favorites. At this point in time, the restaurant is quite successful and outperforms a lot of its neighboring restaurants. But Carl and the restaurant, they're in a bit of a rut. They've been doing much of the same things and have gotten stale. So with that, he goes out to the farmer's market. He gets fresh vegetables. He puts together a menu based on what they have at the market, like the best that's available, but also just thinking of new and different things to impress the critic. But when the owner comes into the restaurant, his input ends up making Carl doubt himself. And so with that, he goes with these old tried and true favorites. When they gather to read the review, it starts out with glowing praise. As, 10 years ago, this critic had visited and was very impressed with what Carl was doing then, right? At that time, he was like this hot new chef. But in the years since, he's become incredibly successful, but less creative and innovative. The review reflects that. It doesn't call into question his talent, but really just that he's become overly comfortable and predictable. That's reflected in his food, where before he was this new, edgy chef willing to try things, at the forefront, leading the charge. Here it is that he's kind of becoming old news. People have been throwing ideas at him about new and different things that he could do, such as starting a food truck. But Carl has a set vision of the way that he sees himself. He puts aside those ideas. But the review kind of makes him call those things into question, right? To reassess what he's been doing and what he should consider doing moving forward. Let me state that I love food. I love movies. I love movies about food. So in this case, when Chef came out, I watched it when it premiered and really enjoyed the movie. The first time I was just watching it, just to enjoy it. This time I watched it, which is now several years later, for this review. And with that, I paid far closer attention, which I guess seems to be like a theme with most of the movies I'm watching for these reviews. I love any movie that shows someone who's really passionate about food, whether they're a chef or a home cook, taking their time putting together dishes. I love to watch people cook. And so that was visually something that I found really appealing about the movie. But it also appealed to one of my other senses, my sense of hearing. I don't know if I picked up on it before, but this time around, I realized that I actually really like the soundtrack. There's a great blend of music. You have some reggae, soul, boogaloo. The music is good. The song selection was part of it, but then also the way that music is used, not just in the scenes where Carl is cooking or other things that are going on, but just at points in the movie where it really adds to what's going on in the scene. For example, there's one scene where Carl is up at night after his son has gone to bed, and he's looking through tweets that people have posted about this review. He's not saying anything. He's the only person there. The only sound is music. And there's this instrumental that plays, and my ears perked up because I realized it's the song that was sampled for Cream, Cash Rules Everything Around Me by Wu-Tang Clan. It's so random, but when I heard it, Cream was a song I remember when I was waiting for the second season of Raising Kanan to premiere. They had that song playing in the trailer. I wasn't even into hip-hop in the 90s. I was a really young kid, hadn't found my way to hip-hop as yet. But now being an adult, when I hear Cream, because I did hear it in my childhood, it's just this whole New York vibe, and it's just this vibe that it gave me, right? And so it blew my mind. I was so excited, just before Raising Kanan came back, to hear that, it reminded me of growing up as a kid in Brooklyn before it was gentrified. So in watching this film, the movie has nothing whatsoever to do with Wu-Tang Clan, Cream, or anything like that. This is actually the original version of the song. But in hearing that little clip, it's I brought my own memories to the movie. Stuff that the filmmakers probably it wasn't anywhere on their agenda. It's just these little drops of music helped to transform the film for me. The soundtrack to me is crazy. I loved it. Carl has a young son, Percy, as he was married, but it's unclear if he's divorced or rather just separated from his wife. I think they might be divorced. And so with that, he has an apartment. She's living in the house, but he spends time with his son. Obviously, as a dad, he loves his son. But when they spend time together, from what we see early on in the movie, he's very distracted. They're doing stuff, but there's one point where it's late at night. I think he's like late picking his son up, or ends up not picking him up. And so to make it up to him, he takes him out for the day. And it's just activity, just a flurry of stuff going on. But we come to see that like Percy really just wants to spend time with him. He's interested in food, cooking, wants to be around Carl at the restaurant. He wants to spend more time with his dad. There's a scene where they just happen to be at his apartment and they're talking, right? Percy says that he likes this, just the two of them being in the house talking, spending time together. And so Carl kind of pauses because from his perspective, he's picking his son up, he's taking him out. He sees that as spending time with him, right? But as Percy explains, when his dad picks him up, they do stuff, but they don't just hang around and talk like they used to when like they lived in the same house. You can take it for granted, but living in a house with someone, you have these little serendipitous moments, these random moments where you might find yourself passing each other in the hallway or sitting on the couch, whatever it is, but randomly having conversations. And you'd be surprised as time goes by, and I know this now from personal experience, having lost family members, that some of those simple and not significant at the time moments are what you remember later. They end up being some of the most poignant and memorable conversations ever. Sometimes even more so than going out and doing stuff. It's more the day-to-day seemingly insignificant things that you sometimes remember more, or that end up being more impactful and valuable to you. So the critic shows up to the restaurant, and given that Carl isn't there, this is after the first visit, he thinks that he scared him off, and he starts posting all kinds of reckless stuff on Twitter, to which Carl replies by showing up at the restaurant and having a complete meltdown. Now, as someone that does reviews of movies and food and things like that, I try to be conscious of how I write things. Typically, if I see a movie that I don't like, I won't review it. If I go to a restaurant that I don't like, I won't review it. That's how I operate, unless it's like just ridiculous or there's some kind of scam or something. Sometimes people are more interested in hearing their own voice than whatever the topic that they happen to be discussing. Not to say that you should lie if the experience was negative, but rather I try to recognize and keep in mind that there's another human being on the other end of that. And in some instances, multiple human beings. And my intention is to be informative, to put my audience onto something new that they might find interesting, something I've experienced and either enjoy or find interesting that I think they might enjoy as well. My intention is like never to hurt anyone's feelings or to be vicious in hopes of getting views or likes. That's really not the vibe that I want to have going on. That's not the person that I want to be. And I think that while Carl's blow up is not really the right move, I did understand him being frustrated and angry that here's this critic that doesn't really understand what's going on in the background, but making assumptions and posting them online. And then some of the commentary that he provides, it shows a lack of understanding of how the dishes are actually made. Like he lacks technical knowledge, but yet he's providing commentary. So with that, you have to kind of question people's qualifications. Like if you're some random person on the internet, I'm a random person on the internet. How knowledgeable are you about the topic that you're discussing, especially if you're critiquing someone else? So Carl takes the critic to task, but because of this blow up, as we live in the age of smartphones, someone records it, it goes viral, and not only is he no longer welcome at the restaurant where he's been working, but he's kind of professionally radioactive now, where job offers from other restaurants are not at all existent. And so he's kind of in a hard place, in like a tough spot, in trying to figure out what his next steps are going to be. He's able to get some help and assistance from his estranged ex-wife, I guess, and through her ex-husband. And so an idea that comes up, which I think given food culture over maybe the last, I'd say, decade at least, food trucks can be a pretty smart idea, right? This idea of branching out beyond how he envisions himself and considering instead what he could be. So in that case, he ends up taking the ex-husband up on the offer to help him get started with the food truck. So actually, my favorite part of the movie is prior to the food truck, right? Like when he's cooking in the restaurant, but then also when there's like a scene where he's by himself cooking at his apartment, and, the scenes where he's cooking on his own. I actually thought those were really amazing. The early part of the movie is probably like my favorite. But once he gets the food truck and is like, working on it and whatnot, that part was okay, but not my favorite. I did like when he visited New Orleans, as At the time, I hadn't visited as yet, and it was on my bucket list because of its history with food, its culture, and things like that. Martin, Carl's friend and fellow cook, joins Percy and Carl in Miami to drive the truck back to LA. Once they get the food truck up and running, obviously it begins as like this old raggedy beat up mess. And as movies like this, the truck starts out being raggedy and whatnot. The characters have to fix it up. In this case, by the end of it, before they leave Miami, it ends up looking pretty good. And so the food truck, because of its mobile nature, I guess, they decide to start selling sandwiches. Well, it's inspired by a Cuban sandwich that Carl has down in Miami. I don't have anything against sandwiches, but they don't look as attractive as the plated food that he'd been making before, right? Probably still tastes great, but the wow factor of the food being made kind of goes down for me at this point. So they start in Miami selling there locally to some guys that help them get equipment on the truck. And then from there, they head over to South Beach where they sell the sandwiches. Percy is pretty tech savvy, and he uses his know-how to post content and promote the El Jefe food truck on social media, which generates attention. They develop a bit of a following, or rather a crowd forms. And as the trio continues on their road trip, Percy continues posting. This helps to further build a following. So in some ways, Carl benefits from having previously gone viral for negative reasons. People love to watch dumpster fires. And so following his meltdown, it brought him to the attention of a lot of people. And now with him kind of attempting to bounce back with this food truck, there's some residual interest in what he has going on. And so with that, the goal is to take the truck, drive it back to LA where they live, but to make some stops along the way. Carl originally had plans to visit New Orleans and was going to leave behind his son. But in this instance, the mom accepts the offer for Percy to stay with his dad through the summer working on the truck. And so with that, they end up passing through a few cities, right? So they leave Miami, they stop in New Orleans, they stop in Austin on the way to LA. New Orleans is an incredible city to me, and I enjoyed seeing the food there, especially because I hadn't visited as yet at that point. A lot of the places that they hit were spots I visited when I went last year, and one of my major things about going to New Orleans was I didn't care what else happened as far as what I did or didn't do, but I knew I was going to get some beignets from Cafe Du Monde, which I did right after checking into my hotel and dropping off my bags. We immediately set out, went to get some food, got some po' boys, and while my mom waited for the sandwiches, I went in search of beignets. They were just as good as I thought they would be. And for the 4 or 5 days that I was in town, I had beignets at least once each day. So it was cool to see them walking around the city, because of the cities they visited, like I've been to Miami, I've been to South Beach, they're okay, but not my favorite places. But New Orleans, I love the food in that city. And so it's like seeing them walk around. I then later visited a lot of those spots. They stop off in Austin where they have like barbecue brisket, which they used to make sliders. They head back to LA, and the road trip has been a success, right? They continue to develop a following and things proceed from there. Basically, I enjoyed this movie because the story is pretty good, both with regard to Carl rebuilding his professional career, but also developing a deeper relationship with Percy. But I love the time that they spent in New Orleans. I felt the film lost a little bit of its visual appeal once they started working from the truck, because with the movement and whatnot, you seemingly see less of the food and cooking. But yet still, I love this movie overall. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click that thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.